My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm a 23-year-old office worker, married for 2 years now. I have a son, Leo, who just turned 1. My husband, Nathan, is 29 and also works for a company. Nathan frequently suggests that I quit my job at my father's company, a sentiment stemming from his dislike for my parents. His distaste for my parents appears to be linked to the fact that my father is a high school dropout and runs a small and grimy company, manufacturing screws and small components. Nathan hates the idea of people knowing he's related to such a company. On the other hand, I admire my father for his tireless dedication to research, his courage, not afraid of failure, and his genuine care for his employees. Thus, I have no intention of leaving my father's company. He seems to dislike the fact that I respect my father more than him. One morning, while having breakfast with Nathan and our son Leo, Nathan brought it up again.
Alyssa, you should really think about getting a job at a bigger company. Considering you graduated from a prestigious university, you're beautiful, and I want to brag about you at work. But I can't, because your workplace is awful. And honestly, I earn enough for us. Why don't you consider becoming a housewife?
This conversation has been over and over again. Every time it comes up, I repeat the same answer, that I will not quit my father's company. Typically, these discussions conclude with Nathan making threatening remarks to me like,
"You're the only one in the world who doesn't listen to me."
or,
"If you keep this up, it's going to be harder for us to stay together."
after this, he usually leaves. But it doesn't end there. Following these discussions, Nathan often does something to upset me and then gloats.
Still, won't you listen to me now?
While I can't say divorce is out of the question, I can't bring myself to do it. Both our parents get along so well and love Leo so much, it would break my heart to upset them. My father and father-in-law are good friends, going golfing and fishing together. My mother and mother-in-law also get along very well, frequently going to art exhibitions together. Both sets of parents adore Leo, and have provided him with a loving environment that I wouldn't want to take away. Regardless, my love for Nathan has faded away. I don't even like sleeping in the same bed with him. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in the child's room with a lock on the door. The reason I added the lock was that Nathan would come into the room while I was sleeping with Leo and start complaining about my father's company. Leo was scared and cried due to Nathan's loud voice in the dark. Since then, Nathan has stopped coming in at night, but I still lock the door just to be safe. As for the harassment I received from Nathan this morning for refusing to quit my father's company, it was as always, just as petty. Despite dinner being ready, he didn't come home. Instead, he went to a night bar with colleagues and sent me a photo of him with a big smile, his face close to one of the female staff. This kind of photo doesn't hurt me or make me feel insecure. As soon as I saw the photo he sent on my messaging app, a new message came in.
"See, this is how I blow off steam, because you won't listen to me."
He said,
"If you don't want me to do this anymore, quit your father's company now."
Honestly, I wanted to ignore his message, but for the sake of both sets of parents and our son Leo, I responded. This was my best response. "I just wanted you to come straight home and have dinner with us." In response, he texted back.
"Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now."
I found myself regretting marrying him, thinking even though he is smart, his character and thought process are so childlike. Then one day, Nathan happily reported,
"I might be getting promoted soon."
"Wow, that's great. Did that recent deal come through?"
"It's not finalized yet, but it's as good as done. I bet the boss will be thrilled, crying with joy. Even the director, who used to act so high and mighty, will have to bow down to me now. Ha ha."
That day, Nathan unusually didn't tell me to quit my father's job and went off to his company. As for me, I left home with Leo to go to my office. After dropping Leo off at my parents' house nearby as usual, I went to work, where my coworker, Jake, hurriedly approached me.
"Good morning, Alyssa. The boss seems unusually angry today. Did something happen? Everyone is worried about him."
Upon hearing this, I knocked and entered the room marked Invention Room, where my father was. There sat a young man in his 20s, with a tear-streaked face on the sofa. Sitting across from him was my father, his face more furious than I had ever seen.
"Sorry, Alyssa. I can't spare the time to chat with you right now,"
he said, to which I responded, "Everyone's worried about you. What's going on?" Apologizing, he invited me to sit in on the conversation. As I took a seat next to my father and looked at the young man's face, he stood up to introduce himself.
Nice to meet you. I'm Scott. I'm sorry for causing the boss any trouble.
I asked him, "May I know what happened?" Scott, apparently an employee with an electrical machinery manufacturer, started to explain. It seems that Scott is employed at an electrical machinery manufacturer. Moreover, he's been promoted to the position of assistant leader for a new machinery project. Interestingly, the designated leader doesn't attend meetings or go to the field, basically serving as a figurehead. The team members reportedly prefer this, stating, "It's easier that way." In essence, Mr. Scott was fulfilling the leader's role. It appears that some components from my father's company were chosen for the project. Scott, without any prior arrangement, visited my father's company and rudely demanded,
I need to speak to the CEO.
His appearance, characterized by his unkempt hair and numerous rings, didn't sit well with my father's secretaries, fondly known as Jackson and Randy, who told Scott,
Please adjust your attitude and appearance before coming back.
Unaware of what was wrong with his demeanor and looks, Scott returned to his company and asked his boss, who snapped,
Don't let them walk all over you. Assert yourself and tell them we're using their parts.
Wanting to fill his colleagues' wishes to use my father's company's components, Scott returned to my father's company and humbly asked Jackson and Randy,
Please let me know what I'm doing wrong.
My father, who happened to overhear the conversation, talked with Scott in the meeting room.
We don't judge people by their appearances. I believe they were just trying to teach you workplace manners,
His father said. Jackson and Randy agreed and proceeded to instruct Scott on professional etiquette. With such an appearance, when you visit other companies, they'll likely judge your entire company based on how you present yourself. When asked,
Which company do you think one can have a decent conversation with? One where people are well dressed and respectful of manners, or one that isn't?
Scott apparently replied.
The former, but let me apologize and start again.
Following that, Scott made an appointment, showed up with his back straight, fixed hair, and without any accessories. As we talked with Scott, we saw his sincerity and commitment to his work, not only in terms of components, but my father said that he was so willing to cooperate with ideas and knowledge. That's how they ended up collaborating. Young members of Scott's company proactively visited my father's company for advice. However, just before a prototype was almost completed after nearly 6 months, it was revealed that the leader had taken all the presentation materials that were prepared. Not only that, but the assistant leader was removed, and a young female employee who he favored was promoted. Although the team and the collaborators vehemently opposed this, they were silenced with threats such as, "Anyone who objects will be made uncomfortable in the company by spreading various rumors." Upon hearing this, my father was furious. Jackson, who had been listening in the background, said,
About those various rumors, they're just going to spread lies, right? You shouldn't be scared, right?
However, the reason the assistant leader was removed was apparently because he reported a violation of working hours to the HR department. Scott said that after severe warnings, the assistant leader was removed. The reason Scott came to my father's company this time was because he was frustrated that the person in charge would change despite all he had done for him, and he wanted to discuss everything.
You should quit that company and come work for ours, right, boss?
All right, Jackson and Randy, are you ready?
My father, impersonating an iconic Western movie character, made everyone except Scott burst into laughter. Scott said,
Despite doing such amazing work, you all seem to be having fun. I've always admired that. I really wanted to work with you all.
And he pleaded with teary eyes, bowing his head joyfully to my father. There was something that had been bothering me after listening to his story, so I asked Scott a question. I asked, "What's the name of your company?" And it turned out to be the same machinery manufacturing company as my husband's. Hesitantly, I asked further, Can I ask the name of the leader?" And as I had feared, he replied,
His name is Nathan Johnson.
Upon hearing that, my father and I held our heads in shock. After a brief silence, Randy said,
I knew I'd heard that name before. It's Alyssa's husband.
I said, "Scott, I'm sorry, that's my husband." And Scott said,
He's the one who gave me the opportunity to work at this company, so I'm actually grateful to him now.
Jackson seemed to have something on his mind, too, and asked cautiously,
I hate to ask, but given that Alyssa's here, does the favored female employee have any relation with your husband?
Scott looked at my face and seemed to have difficulty speaking. So I said, Don't worry about it. I'm in a sham marriage with my husband. I don't have feelings for him anymore. Which surprised my father. After apologizing to my flustered father, I honestly told him about all the things that had been said and done to me every day, and why I hadn't been able to speak up. He understood and said,
No wonder my grandson Leo hasn't been very affectionate with me.
Then, after hearing everything, he added,
I've lived a life that I'm not ashamed of, so I don't care what anyone says about me. But it must be tough for Alyssa to keep hearing bad things about her parents. Don't worry, though. I'll keep my relationship with their parents since they're family and friends. If you ever want to come home, you're always welcome.
His words made me feel like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders.
And what about the relationship between your husband and this favored female employee?
Jackson asked. Scott replied,
There's no solid evidence, just rumors. But it's the talk of the company. Several employees have seen the two of them coming out of meeting rooms or document rooms. A few employees have even seen them going out for lunch together.
At this point, Randy began making a phone call.
Hey, I have a case that I'd like you to investigate. Can you come to the office right now?
After hanging up, he said,
I'm going to have a friend of mine at the private detection agency look into this.
Now, Jackson started to make a phone call as well.
Hello? I need a lawyer who specializes in divorce due to infidelity. Oh, you can? Can you come to the office right now? Thanks.
As Jackson and Randy made progress on their calls, my dad said,
Your greatest strength has to be your ability to take action.
He was laughing as he watched the scene unfold. Scott also offered to keep a careful eye on the two of them. For the time being, everyone returned to their workplaces to get back to work. My father, too, expressed his concern to the worried employees, saying,
I'm sorry for the concern, but it looks like we can laugh about it now. My apologies for causing worry, and thank you, as always.
Hearing this, smiles returned to the faces of the employees, and the usual lively atmosphere was restored in the workplace. My father came over to me and asked,
May I discuss the recent events with your in-laws?
To which I replied, I just want you to tell them to continue visiting and showing affection for Leo, as I always have. By early afternoon, a private detective and a lawyer arrived to discuss our future course of action in the planning room. The contents of this meeting were then shared with everyone present. It was decided that Jackson, who had returned to the company, would convey the details of the discussion. After work, when I went to pick up Leo from my parents' house, I explained the situation from my own perspective, apologizing for my inability to reveal my husband's true nature. I felt as if I had trampled on the feelings of my parents, who believed we were living happily. My mother, far from being upset, seemed thrilled, declaring, Now we need to prepare a room for my daughter and grandson. She had not missed the disdainful look my husband had given my father's company the first time he saw it, and suspected he was not a good man. I wish you had told me sooner. The next day, it appeared Jackson received a phone call on his smartphone from Scott. Scott had submitted his resignation, informing the company he intended to spend his remaining time on miscellaneous tasks and transitioning his responsibilities without taking any paid time off. The company accepted his resignation. However, all the members of the project team reportedly visited the HR department to state, We have all violated the company's work rules like Mr. Scott, so please discipline us as well. Upon seeing resignation letters in everyone's hands, the HR department was thrown into a frenzy. My husband had already left home by the end of regular working hours, so a meeting was held in the large conference room between the company president, department heads, and the remaining project members, including Scott. There it was stated that my husband, who was the team leader, had not attended any meetings or been present at work, and had, in fact, not contributed at all to the project. Further, it was reported that when he learned that the presentation and required documents had been completed by the entire team, he took all the credit, removed Scott from his position as deputy leader, and replaced him with a female employee he favored. The company president reportedly expressed deep regret if this was indeed true. At that point, Scott suggested that no drastic action be taken until all evidence was gathered. The reason he gave was that as the sister-in-law of one of the company's clients, they were also conducting an investigation using a private detective, and it was proposed that nothing be said to my husband without evidence. The company agreed to wait until the evidence was collected, and then to question my husband before deciding on disciplinary action. They asked the team members to hold off on their resignations. Unaware of these serious events, my husband, who usually comes home on time, returned home around 9 p.m. after Leo had gone to bed. He began ranting about how useless everyone else was, boasting about how he had been working overtime to make the project a success. He thought everyone was just jealous because he was going to be promoted to department head after the project's success. Knowing the truth, I couldn't help but chuckle at his delusions. In his good mood, I gave him a few compliments, which I didn't really mean. He seemed to enjoy picturing himself as department head, being looked up to and envied. My husband kept grinning. The next day at work, Scott's plan was put into action. All team members began to continuously praise my husband.
Mr. Department Head, not quite yet.
It seems the CEO is very hopeful about this project.
How can we become competent men like you, Mr. Johnson?
Continuously showered with such compliments, my husband was thrilled and in a constant state of excitement. His guard seemed to be dropping. Then, as planned, we were able to obtain a video of my husband's affair with a female employee from the hidden cameras set up in the document room and the conference room. In just 5 days, a ton of evidence of his infidelity had been collected by both the detective agency and Scott. All that was left was to prove that my husband had not been the one to create the project documents. The proof was easy. Scott had also saved the documents on a USB drive, and it would be clear to the company if they asked him and my husband about the contents of the documents. All of the evidence was submitted to the company by Scott and other members. My husband came home in high spirits, unaware of all of this. Then he began his flight of fantasy, saying,
I'm definitely going to be made department head. The CEO was talking to the current head for a long time. And then the head looked at me. He probably said, I'd rather have Mr. Johnson as head than any incompetent like you.
He then continued his fantasy talk.
With this, the gap between your father's company and mine will widen even more. You should quit your job and become a full-time housewife. You'll be the wife of a department head,
he said. I replied loudly, seemingly angry. Your parents will be mad if they knew you were mocking my parents. You know they're good friends. I take pride in my work and enjoy it. I will absolutely not quit. My husband got angry and said,
Never invite your parents to our family events. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women flocking around me as soon as I become department head.
When I asked, Are you sure about this? He replied,
What do you mean? Don't contact me again.
So I responded, All right, I'll leave. And I had him sign the prepared divorce papers. The next morning, I saw my husband go to work in silence, and then I called my father to help me move. As my father, company workers, and I were loading our belongings onto a truck, my in-laws arrived, saying, We came to help. My in-laws apologized to me, and I apologized to them. Thank you for letting us be Leo's grandparents. Our idiot son is disowned. We're counting on you from now on, Alyssa. As they both bowed their heads, I held their hands and said, Thank you, while also bowing my head. My father said,
Let's hurry up and move so we can relax at home.
To which my father-in-law responded,
Let's do that.
And continued helping with the move. The move went smoothly, and in front of my parents and in-laws, I showed them the signed divorce papers and explained that I was getting a divorce from my husband. My in-laws apologized repeatedly, but my father responded,
Let's continue to get along, Ken,
and playfully patted my father-in-law's knee. My mother said, Mary, let's continue to do embroidery together. There's an art exhibition next week. Let's go. And playfully patted my mother-in-law's knee. My father said,
Ken, Mary, why don't you stay at our house tonight? Let's have a drink.
And brought out some drinks. My father-in-law said,
Thanks. We'll take you up on that offer tonight.
And my parents and in-laws got along even better. Not wanting to get in the way, I decided to go to Leo's room and go to sleep. The next day, my husband was called into a conference room by executives like the CEO and department head. In addition to the executives, Scott, the team members, and the female employee he had an affair with were also there. The hearing for my husband was conducted by the CEO himself. First, he was asked if he intended to claim the project as his own without participating in it and stealing the documents when they were completed. Since Scott and the team members were present, it seemed he couldn't make any excuses. The CEO, growing impatient with my husband's silence, demanded loudly,
Well, what do you have to say?
My husband, it seems, quickly admitted to his actions. Next, he was asked why he had removed Scott from the sub-leader position and replaced him with a female employee. My husband responded,
I thought she was more capable than Mr. Scott.
But the department head retorted,
Are you saying the lady who does nothing more than serving tea and making copies is more capable than Mr. Scott?
My husband bit his lip, lowered his head, and fell silent. The CEO then exclaimed,
The real reason is this, isn't it?
And proceeded to project still images from the video footage taken in the conference room and the document room. Both my husband and the female employee, Alice, turned pale. When the CEO asked Alice,
Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?
Alice responded unabashedly, Mr. Johnson said that if we were together, he'd make it easy for me to earn my salary. Besides, I have a boyfriend, so I wasn't serious about being with him. I just thought of it as part of the job. My husband was infuriated by her response, exclaiming,
You had a boyfriend, you cheating woman. You've ruined my life.
You have a wife too, Nathan. Don't get mad at me, Alice retorted, and a quarrel ensued. The CEO fed up and announced,
The fact-checking is over. I'll inform you of the disciplinary action later. Until then, Mr. Johnson and Miss Ford, you're both suspended and should stay at home.
With that, he left the conference room, and everybody else quickly followed suit. As a result, my husband was reassigned to the menial job of sorting documents in a basement, what's commonly referred to as a useless department at the company. Alice, after her boyfriend found out about her affair, had a hard time at the office and eventually chose to resign as well. A lawyer had prepared an agreement for them to sign, and my husband was to pay me $3 million and Alice $2 million as consolation money. They both ended up taking loans from consumer finance companies to cover these payments. Moreover, I had my husband agree to pay an additional $5,000 per month for Leo's child support. A few months later, my husband, who had been disowned by his parents, was working 2 jobs, at a convenience store during the day and as a security guard for a parking lot at night, and living alone in an old apartment. Someone who saw him said he looked as if he was about 60 years old. He had aged so much.